I've always wanted to travel to the Holy Land, to see what the biblical authors saw and to kind of walk in their footsteps. Perhaps retrace the Apostle Paul's missionary journeys, of course with the help of modern transportation. I do wonder how my attitude would compare to Paul's. I mean, he looked around Athens and didn't wonder at the city of Plato and Aristotle. His attitude, as we've seen, was not awe, but distress at the idolatry that faced him everywhere. And he responded by proclaiming the gospel in the synagogue and the streets, sharing the good news of Jesus and the resurrection. Now, somehow the Athenians, they got the message confused. As Luke tells us, they thought Paul was proclaiming foreign gods. In John Stott's commentary, he suggests that the Athenians, thought he was introducing into Athens a couple of new divinities, a male god called Jesus and his female consort Anastasis, which is the Greek word for resurrection. Now, confusion or not, they were willing to give him a listen. I guess for people who, Luke tells us, spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new, the bar is pretty low for the lecture circuit. And Paul was taken to the Areopagus to deliver what's often referred to as his Mars Hill speech. The two are one and the same. The word Areopagus comes from pagos, meaning hill, and Ares, the Greek god of war. In Roman mythology, Ares is called Mars, hence Mars Hill. Not a bad name for a church, by the way, but you might want to keep a close eye on your pastor. Regardless, Luke reports, then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." He continues, the God who made the world and everything in it, he who is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives it to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor, he made all nations inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. Now, it's interesting that in the streets and the synagogue, Paul proclaims the good news of Jesus' resurrection, yet here at Mars Hill, without any direct quotations, he's taking them all the way back to the creation story. Now, why? Because he starts with where they're at. They are ignorant and idolatrous. So Paul begins, there is a God who created everything. And he's not unknown, but known, and he's not to be worshipped by making idols as you do. As he says in verse 29, since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by art and imagination of mortals. Now, when you unpack his message, it's brilliant. On several occasions, he quotes pagan poets and philosophers. His content challenges the philosophies of the Epicureans and the Stoics mentioned back in verse 18. I think my favorite line is the one I read in verse 27, where Paul suggests that the purpose of humanity was so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far off from each one of us. One scholar, James Boyce, points out the image Paul gives is that of blind people groping after God. Now, the word here for reach out or feel is the same word the Greek poet Homer used in the story of Odysseus and the Cyclops. Maybe you don't remember from your Homer from high school. In this story, the one-eyed giant captured Odysseus and his men. To escape, Odysseus got the Cyclops drunk and blinded him with a sharp stake to the eye. Odysseus wanted to get out of the cave, but it was difficult with the Cyclops kind of groping around to find and kill him. Boyce remarks that in using the word, it's as if Paul is saying, in our sin, we are as unseeing as a blinded Cyclops. We know God is there, but because of sin's blinding effects, we need the grace to have eyes to see him. And not only is the message brilliant, for people that don't know the Bible, what better way to help them understand? Now, the encouragement for us is not merely to be challenged by Paul's words, though we should, but to be challenged by his method, to seek to recognize where people are, where they're at, and when we do have the opportunity to share the gospel with them, to help them to see where the gospel intersects with their lives. Do it in a way that they can understand and, more importantly, respond. Have a blessed week.